Good afternoon and welcome. The subject we're going to be discussing today is entitled Strategic Human Resources Management. I'm going to commence by discussing the history of this particular area of business activity. I'll commence by telling you how it began in terms of time and also the early developments. It started with companies setting up in business primarily during the time of the Industrial Revolution in the UK. That time was primarily from 1760 to 1830. During that time, many businesses came into being, and, for example, men in particular were employed to work in mines and also in factories. Not necessarily a pleasant task for many of those people. The companies concerned did in due course begin to employ welfare officers to look after these employees, particularly perhaps if they may have had injuries, for example, in carrying out their tasks for the companies that were employing them. In due course, time moved on from that, from welfare officers to the commencement of personnel managers, people who were going to be looking after those people employed by the company. So initially welfare officers, later on personnel managers. These collectively could come under the term of people management, the management of people. So in those early days, when there were, in the north of the UK, for example, factories that were producing cotton and wool for clothing, and of course mines that were primarily being used to provide coal. These men in particular, mainly men rather than women being employed in those days, were working in extremely arduous circumstances, working early in the morning and working a very long, demanding day. Primarily they were used for their physical strength. The management felt that they had the intelligence, the skills of discerning how to run the business, how to organise it, and leaving the workers to do the physical work. That's how things were. Many companies did not really care for their employees in the true sense. If the employee became ill, they ignored them. If the employee became injured whilst working, very often they just simply replaced them with another employee. They did not care necessarily for that individual once ill or injured, and indeed for that individual's family if that person was the main breadwinner in the family, the person who was actually bringing in the income to feed the members of the family. There were exceptions to this. There were some companies that were set up who were much more caring. Examples would be, for example, a couple of Quaker families, families that had a religion that was called the Quaker religion, which still exists today. And those particular companies that I'll mention, you probably will have heard of: Clark's, who made shoes, and Cadbury, famous for making chocolate. These families who ran these businesses did care for their workers, and they actually set up homes for these workers to live in, and indeed shops for these employees to shop at. That meant that they were paying these employees, but in return these employees were then paying back because they were living in housing that was owned by the company. And of course when they went shopping to the company shop, they were then paying back further out of their income to the company concerned when they were buying the groceries. But those companies were seen as caring for their employees. They were exceptions to the rule in those days. I'll now go on to consider the resources of a company. The resources of a company are vital in terms of the potential success of the organisation. The main resources of an organisation will primarily be financial. A company that has finance, it needs finance to set up in the first instance, often through borrowings from banks and possibly family and friends. Setting up in business, the need for finance, the need to finance land, to build a factory, to hire machinery, and of course in due course to hire people. So finance is a vital resource in the setting up and running of a successful business. That will be number 3 in my opinion in terms of importance, although many people regard that as number 1. Number 2 I would regard as time. Time is a very important resource and is often forgotten or neglected within the running of a business. It's very important to organise your resource in the way of time, particularly when you have a deadline to meet, you have work to do, and you have to complete it for your client by this coming Friday, by midday this coming Friday, to keep that client happy and to retain that client for the future. So time is very important in business. But clearly, the single most important resource will be the one that is human resource, the use of people in the successful running of a business. So I would say human resource is the key element. Second, time, and third, finance. These are the three most important resources in the running of a successful business. Thank you.